it's our second week for Challenges in Southport History. So before we start, let me ask you a question. Did anybody get to go to any of the events this past week? The Halloween at the Old Jail, the Wood Boat Show, or the Blessing at the Cemetery? Yeah, great. That's wonderful. Did you enjoy them? Did anybody?
Oh yeah.
You guys did? Good, yeah. I worked at the Old Jail. I was a spooky person. And I went to the Blessing at the Cemetery. It was really nice. I didn't make it to the Wood Boat Show, but I know some people worked out there. And did you?
We went to the wrong cemetery initially, because I thought it was the one.
Make you sad you went to the wrong one.
We found it.
That was great that you found it. No, it was really good. And you were able to be there for some,
Yes.
quite a bit of it, so that was nice. It was a really nice ceremony. So, okay, great. And Bob Surridge, our president, was at the Wood Boat Show. He was one of the singers with the shanty singers. I wanted to get a clip of that, but I couldn't get it. We don't have the internet, so I can't show it to you. But maybe in the future we'll get to see that. So, coming up next week, we have the Historical Society sponsors a talk on the second Tuesday of every month on various historical topics. And so the one coming up is Claire is going, one of our classmates here is going to be talking about Moravian holiday traditions. And that will be in this building next Tuesday at 10:30, so 5. So if you want to come, you can come to that here at 10:30, listen to her talk, maybe go get some lunch, and then come back for this talk and just have a whole day devoted to history. And I just found out that there will be some little treats at Claire's talk, so if you need another enticement, there will be food. So that'll be next Tuesday. And those talks that we do, they're every month. They're done by members of the community. Anybody who has a topic you want to talk about, either from your own personal experience with history in Southport or something that you've researched and then you're really excited, you can't wait to tell people about it. We'd love to have you talk about it. And if you have an idea for a topic, see Bob, he coordinates the schedule. Or if you don't have an idea but you want to do a presentation, talk to Bob, talk to me. I'm sure we can help you come up with a topic that you would be excited to talk about and everybody would like to hear. It can be formal with PowerPoint slide if you want, or it can be informal where you just stand in there talking, whatever you want to do. Another event that's coming up, Claire sent me a notice about this. This is going to be happening in Wilmington. It's put on by Wilmington Water Tours, and it's a water tour. It's 3 hours and a boat tour. There's going to be a guide, Dr. Chris Fonville, and he will be talking. He's a noted historian of the Cape Fear region. He will be talking about the history of the Cape Fear region from the first European settlers that came here all the way up through the Battle of Wilmington. And one of the reasons she mentioned it is that he also, I guess, touches on Rose Greenhouse. Somebody last week had asked about her. So that's there. That's November 17th. If you want more about it, you can contact Wilmington Water Tours. It actually isn't associated with the Historical Society. If you're not able to attend that, I just want to mention Dr. Fonville comes and speaks at our Historical Society membership meeting every March. So he will be coming this coming March to our general membership meeting, which you're all welcome to attend. He will be talking about after Fort Fisher fell, and the Union soldiers took over there, and the Confederates pulled out of Fort Catawba and Fort Pender and left, and then they came and Southport surrendered. I asked him to talk about what happened then, because I'm always interested in what's going on with the women and the children and things like that. So when the Union soldiers came, exactly what was next. So he's going to be talking about that, and my goal is to put together a class next fall on some topics from the 1800s. So Rose Greenhouse will be, she was the Civil War spy, a woman spy, so she will be included in that. So some of you asked me some questions last week that I didn't know the answer to, which was great. That gave me a reason to do some research, because I love that. And also it means you're thinking, asking those next level questions, so I wanted to follow up with you on those. One of the questions was whether or not Principal Cavness came to the ceremony when they named the park after him. But there was some confusion when we were looking at the dates. It was like, well, it looks like the park, he could have come. So the answer is no, he didn't come because it's a memorial park. So he actually passed away in 1983, and the park was rededicated to him in 1985. They didn't build the park and then name it from him. It was an existing park. I think it was called West Ellen Street Park because it's on West Ellen Street, right?
Best Pocket Park.
What was it called?
Best Pocket, that's Park.
Best Pocket Park. In the newspaper, they call it West Owen Street, so Best Pocket. Nice. Okay. Do you know why it was called? Because it was small.
I don't know.
Oh, because it was. It's only like 3/4 of an acre.
Yeah.
So, all right. So it was the Best Pocket Park. That's interesting. And so they rededicated it to Mr. Cavness. So this is a picture from the ceremony. You can kind of see it's cut off, but you can kind of see there's a picture of him in front of the podium. And the man who was speaking, that is Dr. Joseph Gore. And he was an assistant principal for Brunswick Community College. So he was talking about what it was like to go to school at BCT under Mr. Cavness. Another question we had, and I'm not sure I see the person. There's someone in the class is worked in the sheriff's department and was I assume a deputy in the sheriff's department. I don't see her. So anyway, she was asking she worked in the sheriff's department, and part of her control area was there she is. Hi, we're just talking about you. You came in at just the right moment. So Bonnie, were you a deputy in the sheriff's department?
I was police officer here.
Police officer here.
It was 6 years, starting in 96.
96, you were a Southport police officer? Okay. See? I have stories. Okay. Southport police officer, and part of your area that you controlled was Cavness Park, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Bonnie was asking, when did it get cleaned up? Because there used to be a lot of problems there with drugs and so I did some research. I could find newspaper articles in the 90s about the time that Bonnie was there, where people were saying, this is a disgrace, we need to clean it up, this isn't a good, we need to clean it up anyway, but also it didn't reflect well on Mr. Cavness. So then I found in 2001, they built the new equipment there, the new gym equipment. They also talked about moving it to, limiting it to younger children and trying to keep the older teenagers and those type of people out. So I think the answer is sometime in the last 20 years, it was cleaned up. And I'm going to continue to ask around to see what I can find. But sometime in the last 20 years, they cleaned it up, and you can see it's a nice, wholesome area now. So that's what that was. Oh, I didn't show you the picture. There's the picture. I'm sorry, I'm a little behind. There's a picture of it in 1994. And then there's the picture when they were building the equipment. So you can see they've spruced it up since then. Okay, the next question that I got was about the age of that big, beautiful live oak tree that is up at BCC. Now, one of the things I found is that that's referred to as the grandmother tree. I've never heard anybody call it that. I saw it in the newspaper. Has anybody ever heard it called grandmother tree? I love the name. I think it should become a tradition that as people become grandmothers, they go get their picture taken there in the tree, they've got grandchildren. I like the idea. So what I did is I contacted Scott Glenn, who is co-chair of the City of Southport's Forestry Committee, which I find fascinating. I want to find out more about because I can't imagine there are many towns the size of Southport that have a forestry committee. And they are dedicated to taking care of trees in Southport and to helping citizens educate people and also to help individuals who have trees, with decision making about their trees and taking care of it. So they really are concerned about individual trees and the overall canopy in Southport. So Scott is also a volunteer with the Southport Historical Society, and he runs our Commemorative Brick Program. So Scott was really nice, and I contacted him, and he said, I emailed him, and then when he emailed me back, he said, well, after I got your email, I went out and I measured the tree, because I hadn't done it in a while, so I just updated my measurements. And he had all sorts of calculations and a formula and stuff, and he said it's really not very accurate. He said it's really hard to tell how old a live oak tree is until you cut it down and count the rings, which luckily he didn't go that far for us. But he said even then it's hard to tell because a lot of times there's rot in the trees, so it makes it hard to count the rings when they do finally die. So he did some calculations, and he said the formula is wildly inaccurate. He also said that he believes that tree, they've done some studies on it, it's actually several trees together. It's not a single tree. Yeah, like four sisters. So he, his best guess finally, after he went through all of those gyrations, was he thought it was around 250 to 300 years old would be his best guess. Which even so, which is pretty impressive, it predates Southport. Southport is 250 years old. So the idea that that tree has been standing there all that time while all this history has gone on around it, I find it very fascinating. So then I was thinking, well, maybe it would be a good idea to let you all know about some of the other trees in Southport that have names, so that you can kind of be in the know on that. Because people do mention them. You just mentioned the Four Sisters, so people will talk. Here's a picture of the Four Sisters. There's a picture of 1938, and then a more recent picture. This is behind the Franklin Square Gallery. And next week when we go on a walking tour, I'll point out these trees and we'll talk a little bit more about them, but I just wanted to let you know about the trees so you can be aware, and if somebody says something, you'll know. The next one is the Indian Trail tree, which is right next door in Keziah Park. I don't know if you've seen that one. Very famous tree in Southport. We'll be talking about that one more next week as well. And then the last one isn't a specific tree as such. It's a series of trees and benches that have been there for over 100 years. And again, we'll be talking about it more when we go on our tour next week. But this is the Whittler's Bench. And the upper left corner of that picture is probably from the 30s, 40s time. As you can see, at that point, there were trees around the bench. The one in the lower left-hand corner is a current picture. That tree was planted in 2012. So they replaced the trees and they replaced the benches over time. That picture there of the men whittling is one of the most widely known pictures from Southport. It actually was in Life magazine in 1973. If you remember Life magazine? And the man on the far right is Bill Keziah, who Keziah Park is named after. So I'll be telling you more about him next week. He's a very colorful character.
So where is this?
Whittler's Bench? It's down at the end of House Street when you head towards the water. Like you come down House Street, it keeps you, right next to Oliver's. It's what keeps you from driving right on into the water. And then this last picture is just to show you that Southport has had a long-standing love affair with its trees. Originally when the roads were built, they actually went around the trees that were growing there. They sort of would, go this way. In the 1960s, we started getting more traffic when they, Sunpoint was there, and then the power station had been built, the power plant. We started getting more traffic. They decided they really needed to pave House Street curb to curb. And so they took down the tree. And this woman, I don't know if you can tell, in the lower right-hand corner, there's a close-up of the wreath that's hanging by her front door. It's a black ribbon with some oak leaves in it. She's showing that she's in mourning for the tree that they've cut down. It's her little silent protest over the fact that they cut down her beautiful tree. So I mentioned that Scott was over our Commemorative Brick Program, so I just thought I would mention that. We do have a Commemorative Brick Program. We sell them just once a year. It starts at the beginning of October, ends December 31st. You can purchase a brick, and then it will be placed, after the first of the year, it's placed in the walkway in front of in front of Fort Johnston. So it's a fundraiser for Historical Society, and it's also a nice way to leave your mark in Southport. Here's some examples. The 4x8s are $75, and the 8x8s, the bigger ones, are $125. There's a link on our website, but if you want more information, just email me and I can send you a link. And those are, we're taking those through December 31st. Okay, so another question that I got was around a gym. Someone said to me, and this I've never heard anything about, they said they heard that there was a gym in Southport that had been cut in half and moved, split. It had been split in half and moved. So I did some digging on that and found out, I actually talked to Randy Jones, who was here last week. He's the one that talked about integrating his kindergarten class. And he knew about that, and he said what it is, it wasn't like sometimes in Southport where they'll move buildings. It wasn't that they split the building and moved it. They started building this gym, and then another town found out that Southport was getting a gym. So maybe the county started building the gym, and there was some like, hey, why don't we get a gym? So what they did is they split the money, I guess. So they built half a gym. So that building is just half. And Randy couldn't remember what the other town is, so I'm going to keep digging on it. But I wanted to find out, do they have half a gym too? You know, that's really kind of cool. And then because I don't know much about gyms, I asked Randy, I said, I don't understand this whole building, how can it be half a gym? It's a gym. And he said, it's too small. So like the basketball court is not a regulation size, it's too small, so you can't have, you know, a legitimate regulation basketball game in it. But it's half a gym. We'll be going by that on our tour next week as well.
I think the other half is in Whiteville.
Whitehall is what I've heard.
Whiteville, yeah.
Whiteville.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
That makes
I kind of tried to look around. I didn't find anything out about
That's one hell of a full court pass.
Yeah.
those are the words that Randy said. Full court pass.
It's a different county.
Yeah, it is different county. That's why I thought
It wasn't then?
Was it? No, it did not used to be part of Brunswick County.
Okay, see, that clears
They
it
got
up. Because Randy said he thought it was Whiteville, and I went and looked and went, well, that's the wrong county, so how can that be? Didn't think about it. All right, so I got to find out if that gym still exists in Whiteville. The last question before we get started was about the markers in the cemetery for the Coast Guard and for the life-saving station, and who put those markers there. So you guys asked that. And I followed up with Nancy Christensen, who will be meeting later today. She'll be helping us with our tour of the jail, and she and her husband really manage the jail and the cemetery. And she said that there are two groups. There's an East Coast Guard group that puts the markers there, and there's also a life-saving group. So they go to the cemeteries and put the markers there. And when I was in the John and Smith Cemetery on Saturday, I looked around and I noticed that there were markers there as well. So they found the cemeteries. So this is good. Okay, if you ask me any other questions and I didn't answer them, I'm sorry, I forgot. I think I got all of them, but if you had some, let me know and I will follow up on those next week. So now, we're going to talk about our main topic today, which is moonshine, smuggling, and prohibition. So, okay. A lot of people think that moonshine came about in reaction to prohibition. So that the government came down and said, you know, you can't buy alcohol, and the North Carolinians went, well then, we'll just make it ourselves. But it actually happened in reverse. People have been making moonshine in North Carolina for over 300 years. Ever since the first Scots-Irish settlers came here, and they knew how to make whiskey back home, so they figured out pretty quickly they could do it with corn here. And so it's really a very much a part of North Carolina culture and history, because it predates it even being a state. North Carolina is part of what's called the Moonshine Belt. So all of these states that are shown here make moonshine and are part of that tradition. But really, in my opinion, there's not a state that has a richer and broader and deeper connection to moonshine than North Carolina. So another misconception about moonshining is that when Prohibition ended, so did moonshine, and that's not the case. Matter of fact, the heyday of moonshining was from the 1930s to the 1970s. And so if you know somebody who grew up in North Carolina during that time period, it's quite likely that they know somebody, or they know somebody who knows somebody, or they've stumbled across a still well out in the woods. So pretty much everybody has some connection if they grew up during that time. So when I was putting this presentation together, I had the good fortune to meet a woman named Kimberly Clemens Cart, and she lives in Holden Beach, and her family is from Brunswick County, but further out, around Ash and places like that. And her granddaddy and his brothers were moonshiners, and she was nice enough to tell me some of her family stories, and said that I could share them with all of you. So the two men that you see there, this is a family picture. The one on the right is her grandfather, Ernest Bland, and the gentleman standing next to him is her father, Levy Clemens. So I recorded part of the conversation that I had with Kim so that we could use it, and so I think I can play it now. Let me just make sure that I got the volume not make it all the way up. We'll try again. Sorry, I gotta go through the slides. Can you hear it?
Barely.
Let me stop it for a second.
Use the remote control and put the volume up on the TV.
Right. Yes. Oh, wait, I got it.
Media volume controls shown. Swipe up to dismiss. Music volume set to 15%.
Can you turn it up?
Yeah.
And I'll make it go back.
Okay.
Volume controls hidden.
Is it up, you think?
Well, we'll see.
Should I try it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what happens. No louder.
Speakers in list 7 items.
That's a little bit.
She's loud.
Settings.
Okay. TV.
Shoot.
Ah.
Should have tried
TV speakers checked radio button in list 2 items. Settings. Press select to activate. Digital audio output not checked radio button. Press.
Why is everything up? Remember when you just...
Yeah, we're turning it now, right? We're turning it.
Yeah. I missed that.
There are still buttons on the TV.
Are there buttons on this TV?
Found it.
Oh, wait, wait,
Yeah,
wait.
there's a sticker.
Got it?
Media volume controls shown. Swipe up to dismiss. Music volume set to 15%.
15%, you got one.
That's what it was.
Now you're moving, now you're moving.
There you go.
All right.
Yay!
You have a business card.
Music volume set to 40%.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
I would let her play first.
Yeah, let me see if I can play it and see what happens.
Back then, you know, like everyone had a feel, like it wasn't, like, not like everyone.
Music volume set to 40%.
All right, I'm gonna get her to start again. Okay, so we're happy with that. And plus, you know, her accent, it takes a second to clue in on what she's saying. So Is everybody set? Try it again.
Back then, you know, I mean, like, everyone had to feel, like, it wasn't, like, not everyone, not everyone, you know.
Volume controls in.
But, you know, if you did participate in music, everybody had a feel, you know, I mean, everybody had one, and like, so, but you didn't tell everybody where your still was, that was something you didn't do, and for a lot of good reasons. And, that's what my mom always told me, that she knew that's how my grandfather liked my dad. When the first time I told him home, he took him out and showed him where it still was.
None of it. I just wanted to hear that. So I love that story. The first time that her mom brought her dad home to meet with her parents, she knew that her father approved of her potential husband because he took her out and showed him the stills. And I'm sure they sampled a little bit too. So what else Kim told me was that her mother and her grandmother did not know where the still was. So he showed it to him, to her potential son-in-law, or his future son-in-law, but they didn't know where the still was. And so I just love that because it really shows how ingrained the culture was, that he was proud of it. You know, he wanted to make him feel welcome. He wanted to kind of show off his moonshining abilities. And so it was part of the culture. And the fact that it was sort of a male culture, at least predominantly. And so I'm sure that Kim's grandfather thought that by not telling his wife where the still was, that he was probably protecting her somehow by keeping her in the dark. But there was at least one occasion where that sort of backfired. And so what happened was he wasn't home one day, and some revenue men came to the house looking for him. So they pounded on the door and they said, we want to see Ernest Land. And so she stood up to them and said, well, he's not here. And they said, well, then we want to look around. And she said, well, go for it. There's nothing here. Go ahead and look around, look all you want. She's just standing there all defiant, Well, their teenage son, who's 17, kind of came sidling up to her, and he knew where the still was. He knew what was going on because he sometimes had to help his father with things. So he comes up and he's like, Mom? She's like, yeah. He said, oh, there is some stuff there. And she's like, oh. She said, well, where is it? And he says, it's in the grapevine. So apparently they had a big grapevine next to the house, and there was a case of moonshine hidden in the grapevine. Now, at the time, it was illegal not just to make it, but to possess it. And so they had it in there. And so she went from being all defiant to being a little, sweating out the visit. But they looked around and they never found anything, and they left. And I just had the feeling when her husband got home that he got fearful about hiding the moonshine out the house. So another misconception about moonshine is that it's always been illegal, and that's not the case. For a good 150, 200 years, it was not illegal. When the Civil War started, North Carolina enacted Prohibition, and that was because, for a lot of reasons, but one of them was that they needed the corn for food. There was not enough food, so they couldn't have corn and grains going towards alcohol. And there weren't. They needed any alcohol that they had, not to be being drunk, but to use for medicine and anesthesia and things like that. And there really wasn't anybody at home, any men at home to be sitting around making moonshine. Everybody had really gone to war. So that wasn't so much of an issue. When the Civil War ended, then, the government was broke, the rules broke. So they decided to start taxing moonshine. Just like after the American Revolution, they taxed moonshine, whiskey, and that led, Washington did that, and that led to the whiskey rebellion in Pennsylvania. Same kind of thing. They decided, well, we'll tax moonshine. And in the beginning, it was about $1.50 a gallon, and then it was $2 a gallon, and then it got up within a few years. It was like 1,000 times. The tax was 1,000 times what it cost them to make the moonshine. So even if they had been inclined to pay the tax, they wouldn't have been able to afford it. Nobody had any money. But also, this was a federal tax. North Carolina had just finished a war with the federal government. They really weren't feeling like they wanted to pay a tax to the federal government. So they had three choices. They could pay the tax, which they couldn't afford to do. They didn't really want to do. They could quit making whiskey, They didn't want to do that either. Or they could take their still, they could move it out into the woods where it was hidden, nobody could see it. They could distill it at night when the smoke would not be as easy to see in the sky. And they could work under the light of the moon. And so, hence the name, moonshine. So originally it was for personal use. Okay, people just made it for themselves, they made it for their friends, but it wasn't anything other than that. It was a good way to keep, to use your corn. But then when Prohibition came out, that completely outlawed any other type of alcohol in the country, in the whole country. So any distilleries, everything, it just shut down, and the only source of American alcohol was moonshine. And so suddenly the demand for it, went through the roof. And it changed from being something people made for their own consumption to something that they made to sell. And they had trouble keeping up with the demand. And so when you have more demand than there is a supply, as you know, prices go up. And so they went way up. It was big business. And so then you had not just the moonshiners, the traditional moonshiners getting into it, but then you had criminals getting into it, people that were just in it, they hadn't done it before as part of their family history. They were in it to make money and to sell it. And so what happened is the quality went down. When you started, before, when you're making it for yourself, you're very careful about the quality. You're not going to poison yourself or your friends. You take a lot of pride. You take your future son-in-law out and give him a drink. But when you're selling it and you're going to make more money the more you can produce, quality is going to come down. You may start cutting corners. You may not filter things out. You may add things to it to give it a little kick that may not necessarily be healthy to drink. You can see all the parallels with drugs today. So that's what happened. So the supply went up, but the quality probably went down. After Prohibition, it wasn't as lucrative, and people tended to start making it more for themselves again, and so that it wasn't quite as much of the rucka that it had been. The moonshine was really made in just about every county in North Carolina, but there were a couple places where it was really focused. Wilkes County was, federal agents called that the moonshine capital of the world. There were also 4 counties in northeastern North Carolina where there were just millions of gallons of moonshine produced. Down in Brunswick County, we had moonshine, but it was much smaller. We didn't have the massive amounts of moonshine being created like there was there. But sometimes in those areas, the federal agents and everything would focus on those areas, and so sometimes when it got too hot, the police were watching too closely, they would look for other places to create moonshine. And so Brunswick County, because it didn't create as much, sometimes was a good place to go. And Baldhead, in particular, must have seemed like an appealing place, because back then there was nothing on Baldhead. I mean, hardly anybody lived there. There was the life-saving station and the lighthouse and a couple people, but that's it. It was very deserted. So it was sort of an ideal place to make moonshine. So in 1927, the Coast Guard and some Brunswick County deputies got a tip that there was a moonshine operation in Baldhead. So they went over and they did a raid, and they found it still, but it only had 20 gallons in it. So that was kind of disappointing. It wasn't the big find that they were hoping to find. But later, they did find a huge moonshine setup, a distillery, that had concrete vats that were capable of holding 15,000 gallons of liquor. So somebody was doing something there. It had been abandoned. When they found it, it was abandoned. So I think they watched it for a while, hoping whoever it was would come back, but they never did find out whose it was. But obviously somebody had thought that was a great spot to create moonshine. So making the moonshine was actually the easy part. That had been being done for a long time. But what the complicated part was delivering the moonshine to the customers. That was the new piece of it. And they could hide their stills back in the woods. There was a lot of woods, a lot of swamp, a lot of places to hide stills, and very difficult for the agents to get back there. But there were only so many roads. North Carolina didn't have a lot of roads, and they weren't very good roads. So they could watch the roads, and when we went to go move the moonshine, that's when we were really vulnerable. So they needed drivers, which were the bootleggers, the ones who would actually deliver the product. And they needed drivers who were brave, that were willing to take risks, that knew the roads really well, that pretty much considered themselves invincible. So, teenage boys. For all of you who raise teenage boys, you know, that's why the insurance rates are high, is because they all drive like the bootleggers. So, that's who they used, and they actually were pretty good. And they would drive really well. They learned how to get away from the law. They would turn off their lights. They would drive. So picture how dark the roads are. You know, if you've driven on a road without street lights, these were dark roads like that. They would turn off their lights. They would cut their brake lights, so they had no lights at all, and would go through there and find their way through the roads and take the back roads and stuff because they knew them like the back of their hand. And they would do a lot of, when they weren't driving moonshine, they were practicing, they were showing off their skills as teenage boys. And they would have little competitions, and they would start doing stock car racing. And then those, after a while, led to NASCAR. And so that's why NASCAR is kind of the sport of the South. It all came out of Run and Shine. So you need.
Are you going to tell us where the name bootlegger came from?
Bootlegger came from when they would smuggle whiskey, a bottle of whiskey, like in their boot. So that was just a bootleg. So you need three things to have a quality operation. You need good product, good moonshine. You need good drivers, and then you need good cars, right? So they would do all sorts of things to these cars to make them better for bootlegging. One of the things they would do is they wanted more space in the cars. So for a car like this, they might take the back seat out and then put cases of moonshine in there and then cover it with a blanket. Sometimes they would cover it with kids. I'm just driving with kids, and they're sitting on moonshine. So they would hide it that way by taking seats out, taking things out of it. This is a 1929 Sheppard Touring Car, and they would do some interesting things with the car like this. So it looks like it's a convertible. Where are you going to put anything, right? How could that transport moonshine? But what they would do is they would pull out the back seat and create a false door there. And then they would build like a box underneath the carriage, and they would lower moonshine down into there. And they could get like 125 and 135 gallons under there. They would also move the gas tank. So they would put the gas tank under the floorboards. And then where the gas tank was, they would create a shine tank. So you could hold, where they think it was just a gas tank, but it was really moonshine, you could get another 25 to 35 gallons there. So those are some of the tricky things they did with the cars. But but what they needed to do was soup up the cars, make them as fast as possible, do everything they could, but at the same time, make sure they didn't look suspicious. So they wouldn't paint them, they wouldn't make not flashy tires or chrome or anything that showed on the outside that this was a souped up car. But they could put a lot of money into the car. They had a lot of money, they were making a lot of money. A good, fast car was really important, and so they would put a lot of money into the cars. The police, on the other hand, didn't have a lot of money, and so they were stuck with the same cars that they'd been using. So the bootleggers were able to actually create faster cars than what the police had to work with. And this one was real popular. They started being more concerned about speed than volume, because the police had gotten better at roadblocks, and they would put out these things with nails in them, I forget what they're called, they roll those out. They do all sorts of things to stop the car. So it didn't matter if you had a whole lot of volume, if you weren't fast enough and sneaky enough to get it around, they were going to stop you. So they became more concerned about moving smaller quantities of product faster. So they used cars like this. This was a popular one. This is a Ford Model 18, and it had a V8 engine with 65 horsepower, which was a lot better than the Model A Ford, which only had a V4 engine. So North Carolina, this is where it gets really interesting. North Carolina was a leader in both moonshine and prohibition. So that seems like a contradiction. And this is so I gave us a lot of thought, and I have a theory because I'm always making theories. And my theory is that prohibition was about public drunkenness, public consumption. So it was about closing saloons. It was about stopping people from being drunk on the street. You know, women being able to walk down the street and not worry about running into someone who was inebriated. All that public drunkenness, prohibition was going to do away with. But moonshine had always been more of a private thing. People did it at home, they drank it at home, they drank it with their friends, they did it in the woods. So I think it's not really a contradiction. Those two things can coexist because they really wanted the public drunkenness to go away. They weren't as concerned about what people were doing back in the woods or in their own home as long as they didn't bother anybody else. And the other thing that's kind of confusing is that the moonshiners, a lot of times, were kind of seen as, well, sometimes as good members of society, of the community, even though they were criminals. And sometimes they were seen as folk heroes, kind of affectionately. And I think that had to do with the fact that the law that they were breaking, again, was really non-paying taxes on it. When you look at, you know, we go do newspaper searches on this, you see a lot of times what you want to search for is non-taxed liquor, non-tax paid liquor, because that was the law they were breaking. They weren't paying taxes. So again, people didn't take that all that seriously. It was federal tax. They were thumbing their nose at the federal government. They kind of had sort of they were seen as sort of independent and sort of a folk hero kind of status. So these are a couple of the people who were sort of legendary around moonshining and bootlegging. So Junior Johnson was a bootlegger. He started running whiskey when he was 14 years old. He was very good driver. One of his signature moves was that he could be going down the road and he could turn the car 180 degrees to head it in the other direction, all in one lane, without changing his lane. So he was very skilled driver. He ended up, you can see that's a mugshot. He was never caught for bootlegging, and he was proud of that. He was never stopped for bootlegging. He was arrested because he was visiting his parents one time, and he offered to go out and fire up his dad's still for him. And there were federal agents hidden there waiting for someone to come out, and so he was the one that did. And so he got arrested, and he went to prison for 11 months. And so he became a NASCAR race car driver. He had started already driving before he got arrested. And then he went to prison for 11 months, and then he got out and he resumed his NASCAR career. But he was very well thought of, and in fact, in 1986, Ronald Reagan pardoned him. Yeah, gave him a full pardon. So, and then the other one who has sort of a cult following is Marvin Popcorn Sutton. His nickname is Popcorn. And he wrote a book about his moonshining called Me and My Liquor. And he also participated in a documentary about moonshining and how he made moonshine. And so he was well liked in his community, and then he sort of developed this a larger folk hero kind of status. He was very quirky. So anyway, those are a couple people. It's just confusing because, you know, they're outlaws and they went to jail a lot. Popcorn Sutton went to jail a lot. Junior Johnson's dad spent a third of his life in jail for moonshining, but they were thought of affectionately. So we didn't really have anybody like that in Brunswick County. Yeah, we didn't have massive moonshining. But there was one story that Kim told me that I thought was kind of legendary, so I thought I would pass it on to you. So I mentioned that her family, her grandfather and his brothers made moonshine, and that sometimes they would get her uncle involved, her teenage uncle involved. So there was one time when they needed to move the still. She doesn't know the exact particulars of it, but they had it someplace and they needed to move it, and so they sent him to do it. And he went out to do it, and he had his truck, and he went to go load it up. Well, when he got there, he realized that there was mash in it that was fermenting, okay? And that's the first step in making the moonshine, and that's where the money is. That's where all the product is. You kind of put all that in there, whether you make it from corn or sugar, whatever. You've got an investment in there. So he realized that it was partly through the process. So that they've been waiting to do it. So he loaded it up because it was heavier than it was supposed to be. He loaded it up onto his truck, and he went to go move it to wherever it was that they had told him to move it. He gets about halfway to where he was supposed to go. He's out in the middle of an open field, and his car breaks down. So he's got this still there, and he's like, what to do? And again, he's young, and they always told him, be very careful, don't do anything except, in the woods. So, but he thought, what are the odds? What are the odds that even though I'm in this field, what are the odds that anybody's watching me? That would be quite a coincidence. So he ends up, for some reason, deciding to go ahead and set up a still right there. So he gets it, unloads it from his car. Maybe he had to take it out of his car in order to fix his car. So while he had it, so he set up the whole process, and he starts distilling the alcohol and making the whiskey. So in the meantime, while that's happening, then he starts working on his car, So eventually, all this happens. He finishes distilling the whiskey, he bottles it up, he loads it all back in his car. His car's running by this time, gets it all loaded up, goes on his merry way. He's pretty smug because he got away with it. Nobody was watching him. So later, they came to find out that there had been people watching him. There were federal agents in the woods watching him do this. But the thing was, they couldn't believe that anybody would be crazy enough to be, running a still in the middle of an open field. So they were sure it was a setup. They were sure that if they went down and arrested him, that there were people in the woods that were going to start shooting on him with the ambush. So he's there, likely doing a still. They're going to. I know there's people in here somewhere, and there was just their imagination is what kept them safe. So I thought that was a pretty good story. So we didn't have too many car chases between bootleggers and lawmen in Southport. But in 1930, we did have a pretty significant one. The Southport police chief, Ed Leonard, he was nearly killed while chasing bootleggers. He was chasing him down up River Road. So if you can picture River Road, and it's, back then the roads were just terrible. There was no lighting, there was dirt roads, and it was windy and all of that. He's chasing them through this, and all of a sudden, just gunfire breaks out. His windshield totally blown out. They had turned around. They didn't shoot car out. They got the back window. They were shooting at him and wiped out his windshield, caused an accident. He went off the road. Fortunately, he ended up being okay, but he was nearly killed. And the culprits were never caught. So I'm sure he was, he was quite shattering, but he was glad that he survived. And that's one of the things that we tend to forget. I mean, it's been nearly 100 years. It'll be 100 years in January since Prohibition started. And we've gotten to the point where we think of it as cute and charming and quaint, and we dress up and we have parties and about Prohibition, and we forget this was very real to people. This was a dangerous time. And during Prohibition, there were 14 years of national prohibition, and there was an average of 252 police officers killed every year. And to give you, that's about 2 or 3 times as many as are killed nowadays. So it was dangerous. And in fact, in 1924, 2 of those police officers were killed in Brunswick County. So these 2 men, C.W. Stewart and Elmer Stewart, their father and son, they were moonshiners, and there were there was a deputy marshal and a detective sergeant who had been searching for their still, been coming around and doing stuff, and they decided they needed to get rid of them, and so they ambushed them and shot them up, and also their dog. They had a dog. The police had a dog with them, and they killed the dog too. So it was quite a horrific thing in Brunswick County, and so they were held at the South. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Is that grave in Smithville Cemetery?
No, it's in I think it's in Wilmington.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
Just, you said 14, what were the dates that Prohibition was?
it's on your timeline if you have it, but it's from 1919 to 1933. So it was passed in 1919, it went into effect in January of 1920, and then to 1933 is when it was passed.
Thank you.
So the jail, we'll be seeing that later today. They were housed in the jail. Then they were tried in the courthouse. We'll be seeing that next week when we take the walk around. And then about 6 months later, then they were executed in Raleigh. That's not a picture from Southport, that the electric chair, that's in Raleigh. So yeah, they were killed the same day. The father did try to take all the blame and say, let my son go, but they killed them both. So this is the jail. We'll be visiting that later. There's no real guess about it because it's still the jail. And then this is the courthouse. The courthouse is currently, it was the county courthouse. We're no longer the county seat. And then it was the city hall. Right now, it's not being used, and there is an organization, a nonprofit, that is trying to get money to refurbish it and set it up as a community space for artists. They want some art studios and an art gallery and some meeting spaces that can be used by the community. They are going to be talking at the Tuesday Talk in January. Is that correct? And right here.
And Emma's on the board.
Who?
Emma,
Emma?
is that Emma? Not Emma, sorry.
So anyway, they're going to be talking in January and telling more about their plans and everything about that. And hopefully that takes off because it sounds like it's a lot of fun. Okay, so from there, we're going to take a 6.5-minute break. So we need to, there's some snacks there, some water, bathrooms, and then we'll start up and then music stops. You may be wondering, okay, so when did Southport go dry and why? Why did it go dry in the first place? So the first instance I could find of Southport attempting to outlaw alcohol was 1871. And that was earlier than I would have thought it would have. But then, if you remember last week, we talked a little bit about what it was like here after the war. It's a small town. It was occupied. There was a lot of military living here. There was the white community. There was also the African American community living here. So you had different communities that didn't necessarily gel. And there was some drinking. We know that there were some fights that broke out. We know that there were some altercations between the troops and some citizens, on the streets. We know that there were a few small little altercations like that. We know that in some of the political rallies, the men would be drinking and then they would be arguing about politics and then they would suddenly be fighting. So some things, yeah, all the same. So you can see how that would happen. So I think Southport maybe was trying to get some control back over their lives. They'd gone through so much change. And so one thing I found surprising was that there was actually a temperance group that started up in 1880, and people would voluntarily sign something and agree to stop drinking and to stop cussing. And so that was something. And there was also a petition that was signed by 100 of the women in Southport that was sent to the state government requesting that the Southport be made dry. So I wish I could get that roster of the petition and then also who's promising to stop, but we don't have either of those things. So there were some attempts to try and go dry when they were submitting it to the state. And then what the state did in 1887 is they came up with what they called a local option. And basically that meant they were leaving it up to the local communities to determine whether or not they wanted to be dry or wet. And so as soon as that happened, Southport voted itself dry. They wanted to be dry. And that lasted about 12 years. And then they were kind of forgotten by then, and they were like, well, maybe we could handle some liquor. So they started giving some temporary permits to a couple of the local men in town, the butcher, to get like a 30-day permit where he could sell some hard cider. And just a couple little things like that. And then when the election came up in 1901, they actually decided, okay, I think we can handle it. And so they voted to go wet again, and they authorized 2 saloons. So they had 2 saloons. That lasted 2 years. When the next election rolled around, they went, no, we can't handle it. So I don't know what happened between 1901 and 1903, but it was an experiment that failed, and they said, nope, we're going back and going dry. So in 1903, they voted themselves dry again, and stayed that way. And one of the things that's interesting further on that is that by 1903, the African Americans had had the vote taken away from them. Women had never had it. So it was the white men, and 2 out of 3 voted to go dry. So I find that very interesting. I would not have expected it. So about 5 years after Southport went dry, all of North Carolina went dry. And it was 11 years before national prohibition. So when you think about prohibition, we usually think of 1919 to 1933. But it started much earlier in North Carolina. They voted it in 1908, went into effect in 1909, and it stayed dry. And it stayed dry longer than the nation. So there were only about 8 or 9 other states that were dry at that point. There continued to be some. But North Carolina was unique in that it was the first state in the South to vote itself dry. There were some states that went dry because the legislators passed, an ordinance that said we're going to go dry. But North Carolina was the first ones that actually voted themselves. And much like in Southport, about 2 out of 3 people that were voting voted to go dry. So it was popular. One thing to keep in mind is that North Carolina was dry, but it was sandwiched between 2 wet states. So you had South Carolina and Virginia. You could still buy alcohol in South Carolina and Virginia. So if you had transportation and you could get across the border, you could buy alcohol. And if you, or you could mail order. This is an ad in the newspaper where you could order alcohol to be sent to you. So again, there weren't saloons, it wasn't public drinking, it wasn't in the streets, and this is the way I found it was kind of true throughout Prohibition. Prohibition wasn't necessarily so much about getting rid of all alcohol, it was removing alcohol from certain groups of people. It was like, I know I can handle it, I'm not so sure about them. It was sort of the way it worked. So because of this, obviously, to get to travel or to order it, you had to have some money to do that. So it was keeping the average Joe from being able to get alcohol, unless they used moonshine. So what were the drivers of Prohibition in North Carolina? Why did they want to have it? And there was a variety of people from different angles, different organizations that all kind of had this common idea that getting rid of alcohol was good, but they had different reasons for it. So the biggest reason that you think of when you think of North Carolina are the churches. So the Methodists and the Baptists were all against drinking, and so they were a big driver of it in North Carolina. Another was the WCTU, and I have that picture up in the left corner there of Carrie Nation. She was kind of on the fringe of the WCTU, but she was the most well-known. People that know about that. She's the one that took the hatchet and would break up the saloons and stuff. Wow. But the WCTU was actually a legitimate organization. She just got frustrated and started doing that, and it got them publicity. But the WCTU had about 250,000 members nationwide. Remember, women did not have the right to vote at that point, but they had learned because of what they'd gone through with abolition. Women were very strong in the abolition movement and getting rid of slavery. So they learned that they had some political power, even though they didn't have a vote. So they formed the WCTU, and they were really putting pressure on to try and get rid of the saloons. And their motivation was, we were in the process of transitioning from an agricultural country to an industrialized one. And when you moved from the farms, you didn't have a paycheck, right? You would work on the farm and you would get your crops and everything, but you didn't get a weekly paycheck. Once we moved to an industrialized jobs, men would go to work. On Friday, they would get paid. They would take their check to the saloon to cash it. And then they'd start drinking it. And very little of it made it home to their wife and children.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong with this? So they, very little of it made it home. So the women and children were at risk for being evicted. They were at risk for starvation. The men would be drinking to excess. They would come home, they were angry, they knew they'd messed up, so they were angry, they were looking to pick a fight. So that led to all sorts of abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse. There were no laws against that back then, and there was no divorce. So the women were really trapped. So the WCTU looked at that situation and worked its way back and said, well, the root cause is the alcohol. If we could get rid of the saloons, we could get rid of the liquor, then none of the rest of it would happen. So that was their big motivation. The man up there at the top in the middle that says for senator, that is Furnifold Simmons. He's the longest serving senator ever in North Carolina's history. He served for 30 years in the Senate. And his platform was white supremacy. He was very blatant about that. That was his platform. The large picture of that man, that's Josephus Daniels. He was in the newspaper in Raleigh. He was also a white supremacist that worked with Simmons. So a lot of their motivation was, again, they didn't feel African Americans should be drinking. So that was their goal. Josephus Daniels, his intentions might have been a little bit broader than that, because under Woodrow Wilson, he was made Secretary of the Navy, and the first thing he did was get rid of all drinking in the Navy, 5 years before Prohibition. So he was probably really popular in the Navy. Then up in the right-hand corner, you see those men working. They're railroad workers. So the railroads were also for Prohibition, and so were the textile industries, because they wanted to employ people, and they didn't want them coming in hungover or drunk. They didn't want the absenteeism. They didn't want the injuries. They didn't want the fighting. Anything, all those things that go along with drinking. So a lot of the railroad camps were actually dry. So all of those have their own reasons for Prohibition, sort of different angles why they thought it would be a good idea. But by themselves, they probably didn't have enough clout. They might have in North Carolina, but certainly not nationally. But the Anti-Saloon League was who had the most clout. That was a lobby group. It's the biggest single issue lobby that we've ever had. They were only focused on stopping saloons, stopping drinking, getting Prohibition passed. They didn't care about anything else. And they would align themselves with anybody if you also had in your agenda that you wanted to stop drinking. They didn't care what else you had in your agenda. They would align with you. They were very powerful. They were very savvy. And they managed to have a lot of money. And so, you think about the lobbies that we have today, they were even more powerful than that. So those were the majority of who was involved in it. There was another significant group that was involved in it, and that was, and I think I mentioned last week, the second wave of the KKK. Remember I said it was very bold of Southport to try and build that school in 1921, because that was sort of the epitome of when the second wave of the KKK came along. It was a terrible time of race relations in the country. So the first, what they call the first wave of the KKK, happened right after the Civil War and lasted probably less than a decade. And that was in the South and was focused on, the aftermath of the Civil War and focused on African Americans. The second wave of the KKK started in about 1915 and lasted until the 40s. And that was it was a broader scope, and it was a broader amount of people. It went over the entire country. The largest population in any state was in Indiana. There were between 4 and 6 million people in the organization. And they were against anybody that they didn't consider true Americans. So mostly it was, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. That was the deal. And so they were against the Catholics and the Jews, immigrants. They saw, from a drinking standpoint, people saw them as bringing alcohol into the country. So it's part of the culture of the Irish Catholics, Italian Catholics, I just lost another group. Germans with beer. So they said, these immigrants are coming in and they're bringing alcohol, they're bringing this culture. And so they were anti-immigrants and anti-African Americans. That picture on the right is from a KKK publication, and it's showing them, how St. Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland. This is the KKK driving the Catholics, St. Patrick, out of the U.S. And they have all these different snakes that they've labeled with things, and I find it interesting that one of them is religious intolerance. So they were accusing Catholics of religious intolerance, and they were
Right.
dropping them out. And apparently, there's not a real good sense of irony among the Catholics. When I said that the Anti-Saloon League would get in bed with anybody, just a second, let me just finish my sentence and ask. When I said they would get in bed with anybody, they were closely tied with the KKK. Because the KKK, then when the reason the KKK said because the government wasn't doing enough to enforce prohibition because they didn't have enough money and there was also a lack of will. Some laws were like, they didn't feel like they were enforcing it enough. The KKK said, we'll do it, we'll enforce it. And so we'll be the arm of it, and so they would set fires and burn, they would do all the terrorist kind of things that they would do in order to enforce it. And it was the first time that there was women in the KKK. There was an actual branch of the clanettes or something, I don't know, they called themselves something. And the reason that they joined in the message that they gave them was that they were for family values. So they obviously distorted the message, but that was why the women were drawn to it. Sorry, go ahead.
Where did the name Ku Klux come from? What does that mean?
I'm not sure. I can try to find out next week. I know it started in Tennessee, but I don't remember. And I've read it, but I don't remember Ku Klux. Does anybody know Ku Klux Klan? I'll look and see if I can find out.
It's not, it isn't significant.
I think they just made it up, right?
Yeah,
I just
it's
thought
something that
sounded
they got
cool.
from, they started with the idea of plan, and then they came up with a coup, but it's not, you think it's gonna have some kind of deep meaning, but it doesn't.
Yeah, that's the way I remembered it.
Yeah.
I just thought it sounded cool. Maybe they were the cool Klux Klan at the time. So,
KK and the Sunshine Boys.
yeah, I don't know. So that was a huge thing that was going on. And then another thing was that we were getting ready to go to war. The World War I started in 1914 in Europe. It started here in 1917. And so, again, just like in the Civil War, any grains that went towards making alcohol was what couldn't be used to make bread. So part of it was, if you're going to be making alcohol, you're keeping us from being able to feed our boys over there overseas. We could be making bread with that. There was also, again, like I said, the Germans. If you think about beer manufacturers, it's all Anheuser, Busch, Schlitz. We don't think about that now, but it's all German families. They were all German immigrants, and so drinking beer was seen as something that was unpatriotic. They started calling it Kaiser brew. It was the drink of the enemy, and so it was all very patriotic to not drink. So with all of those people against drinking, who was for it? And as you can imagine, mainly it was the liquor industry. Yeah, and Bob Sturridge and the liquor industry. So they were against prohibition. So that's why in North Carolina it passed so easily and so heavily. Because remember, North Carolina first started getting rid of it in unincorporated parts of the state, and then in smaller towns, and then finally the whole state. So there really was no liquor industry. There were no saloons. They've been gradually getting rid of it anyway, and so it was much easier then for the state to go dry. Across the country, so there were about 24 states that had gone dry by that point. But the liquor industry still wasn't worried. They were pretty confident it would not go national. And the reason was they thought they were too big to fail. They thought that because they provided 40% of the United States revenue, the tax money on liquor, gave us 40% of what our budget was, what our money was. They were like, you can't do without us. What's good for the liquor industry is good for the country. And so they were pretty confident. But what they didn't count on was something that happened in 1913, see if anybody knows. A constitutional amendment was passed in 1913.
Curse us with income tax.
Income tax. So, income tax happened in 1913, and all of a sudden, the government had another source of income. They were no longer as dependent on the liquor industry. And I really think that paved the way for the possibility of prohibition, because all of a sudden, they could afford to get rid of the liquor industry. At least they thought they could. So, 16th Amendment, 1913, income tax. So now it became very clear for Congress that the constituents wanted prohibition, and it could be done because they passed the income tax law. So, for a second, I just want you to pretend you're Congress. You're a functioning Congress that wants to pass laws that reflect what your constituents want. So just by a show of hands, if you were Congress and you needed to pass prohibition, so you had to say what was illegal, what would you prohibit? So, how many would outlaw selling liquor? You want to be true to your constituents who want prohibition, okay? Well, how many would outlaw buying liquor? Okay? Manufacturing? Okay. Transporting? How about owning it? How about consuming it? All right. Okay, so remember how you voted. Most of you are not listening to your constituents. Okay, and now what kind of alcohol would you prohibit? Who would outlaw liquor? Hard liquor. Who would outlaw wine? How about beer?
No way.
I think you're all going to be voted out of office. How about medicinal uses? Who would outlaw medicinal use of alcohol? And what about for religious sacramental purposes? Okay. All right. So remember how you voted, so you can see how Congress voted. I think we'll have a lot of empathy for Congress. So this is the 18th Amendment of the United States. Here is what Congress outlawed: making it, selling it, transporting it, importing and exporting it. Those are the things that they said were illegal. But, like many of you, they kept legal buying it, owning it, and consuming it. So it was very strategic. They would be able to continue to purchase it and own it and buy it and consume it. But obviously it was against the law for the people who were manufacturing it and selling it. So that was their decision on that. And of course, the people in Congress and a lot of people in power had a lot of money. And so there was a year, so the 18th Amendment was submitted in 1917, it was ratified in 1918, and went into effect in 1919. There was a lot of time to know that it was coming. If you had money, you had the opportunity to go and stockpile. You could build a wine cellar, you could build a liquor, cabinet, whatever. You could stockpile it and you would have it when Prohibition came. The average guy does not have that kind of money that they could start stockpiling it and keeping it, or a place to keep it. So again, it was really about who do we keep the liquor away from. North Carolina, not to be outdone, the leader in Prohibition, passed an act in 1923 that outlawed everything. You couldn't make it, sell it, barter it, transport it, import it, export it, deliver it, furnish it, purchase it, or possess it. You couldn't do anything in North Carolina. If you had anything to do with alcohol, it was illegal. And the only exceptions at the federal level and at the state level was for religious purposes and medical purposes. So you can imagine what was coming next.
The larger churches and hospitals.
Say what?
The larger churches and hospitals.
So the only way to get it would be to get a prescription from your doctor. So you could get a prescription, and you could get it for a variety of reasons. You could get it for your rheumatism, for your arthritis, for your diabetes. I'm not sure how that worked. You could get it if you were a lactating mother because you needed to relax. You could get it for old age, just general old age, I was thinking of Granny Clampett on the Beverly Hills rheumatism medicine, that's what it was. But still, again, it was keeping it out of certain people's hands because it cost you $3 to go to the doctor. You could only get one prescription at a time, and you could only get one every 10 days. So it would cost you $3 to go to the doctor. That was the same as $40 in today's money. You would go buy it, you get your pint. All you could get was one pint, $3 for the pint. So you'd have to keep going back. And so that's like $80 every 10 days, and people couldn't afford that. And the only people getting rich off of it were the doctors who were prescribing it and the pharmacists. So that picture in the middle is a picture of the window of Watson's Pharmacy. That was the pharmacy here in Southport. And here's another picture you can see better. This is a picture of it in the 1960s. You can see it was being renamed Watson's Rexall, looks like. And then there's a picture from 2017 when it was a restaurant called The Pharmacy. So it's no longer called that. So I'm just wondering, does anybody recognize the oyster? Yes, very good, the oyster bar. All right.
But there was still a Rexall sign up until last year, right?
Could have been when it was a restaurant called The Pharmacy. They might have kept that because it would be cool. Yeah. So one thing that I haven't touched on so far is that, so when I said moonshine was the only way to get American alcohol, right? So the only way to produce it would be to produce it illegally by definition. But there was another way to get alcohol into the U.S., and that was by smuggling from other countries. And one of the ways to do that is by ships. And so Southport, being on the coast, was a port for bringing in illegal alcohol. So, the way this would work is that the waters that the Coast Guard patrolled extended out 3 miles. That was in U.S. waters. Tell me if I'm saying this wrong. So it would extend out 3 miles. After that, it was international waters. So these large ships would come from Europe, from South America, from Canada, and position themselves just off of where that was, right at the edge. They were in international waters, and they would sit there, and they would be like floating warehouses of alcohol. And then there were ships called, with boats, called rum runners. And these were akin to the bootlegging cars, right? And they would be small ships, they would go out at night, they would, find their ways to the big ships and load up with imported alcohol. And then they would maneuver their ways back and dump their cargo on the land, and then the bootleggers would load it up in their cars and they would take it to the city. So that was the way it was smuggled in. Now remember when I said the bootleggers had the advantage of the cars because they could put all this money into their cars, but the police just had their police cars. They couldn't soup them up. Well, one of the advantages that the Coast Guard had over this, it wasn't quite the same deal, because this was after World War I. So they had some World War I surplus boats, and they were pretty powerful. So this is a Rum Chaser, and this was a World War I surplus boat, and you'll see that there were 3 men for each boat. You'll see at the front of it, there's a machine gun attached. And it also they had 4 rifles and 4 automatic handguns. They meant business. And they had 180 horsepower engines, and they could cruise at 20 miles per hour. So really, on the water, the Coast Guard had the advantage over the rum runners. So the rum runners would have to kind of get sneaky. And so there was one time in 1930 that the Coast Guard out on Oak Island received a distress call from the Frying Pan Lightship, which is sort of a floating lighthouse out at the Frying Pan Shoals. And so they got this Mayday call. And so there was a Coast Guard cutter from Oak Island, and there was a buoy tender from Charleston that was there, and they immediately started racing towards the lightship in order to give them help. And they must have radioed that they were on their way, bringing help. And the lightship went, "What are you talking about? We don't need help. We didn't call for help." And so then they figured out pretty quickly there was another ship that had radioed and said they were the Frying Pan, thinking that they could get them out of the way long enough for them to bring in their cargo. But they figured it out. They caught them, and it was a British auxiliary schooner, and they had 974 cases of Canadian liquor in their cargo. So there's another story that was told by Laverne Goodman Redder. She used to go to school here, and then she went up to Wilmington, Kentucky, and became a pilot. But she used to tell a story about how her father had sort of inadvertently helped some rum runners at one point. So he was building a boat, a big boat, and people in Southport would build boats. And he needed an engine for the boat, and they had 2 cars. One of them was a touring car like this one you see here. So he thought, well, I'll take the engine out of the touring car and I'll put it in my boat. It'll be a real powerful engine. So he did that, and it was really fast. So not too long after he built this boat, some men showed up at his door, and he said, in retrospect, he probably should have been a little suspicious. Because he said they had a fancy car and they were dressed like millionaires. And they said, we want to buy your boat. And he thought about it, and it was the Depression, and they were offering cash, a good amount of cash. And so he said, fine, I'll sell you my boat. You want my boat? You can have my boat. So a few weeks later, he was sitting out on his porch and looking at the river, and all of a sudden he sees this boat that he's built come racing up the river. And then, a minute or so later, he sees a Coast Guard boat racing up the river after it. So he got real interested because he wanted to see how good of a boat could I build. But it was good, but it wasn't that good. The Coast Guard did catch the boat. He went up to Wilmington. What they used to do was they'd impound them, confiscate them, and then they would auction them off in Wilmington. So he actually went up and kind of checked around, investigated the story. Turned out that it was part of they were bringing in liquor from South America. And that was part of what it was. I'm surprised he did that because I would think that he'd run a risk of being charged with an accessory, but he pretty much convinced him he really didn't know what was going on when he sold the boat. So by the mid-1920s, really the honeymoon was over as far with the country and Prohibition. It just had not worked out the way that they had expected. There was, the government had lost billions of dollars in tax revenue from liquor that they would have been able to charge. They spent $300 million in enforcing it, and it hadn't gone that well. They had thought that when they banned alcohol, they would see other types of entertainment money going out. They thought there'd be people would spend more money on restaurants and theater, and they would get that revenue. But that wasn't the case. They spent on illegal alcohol and speakeasies, and so there was no tax revenue from that. Now, overall, drinking had gone down. So if you look at it that way, Prohibition was a success, if you define it real narrowly like that. But also, there had been a shift in who was drinking. It had become kind of glamorous to drink. It had become, much more popular, especially among women. Women didn't drink before. And now there are all these cocktails that disguise the taste of alcohol, and so it became a thing. So it really had changed the way people drank. They went out and partied and got drunk. Crime rates had risen. And not just you think of the mob and things like that, but not just that kind of crime had risen. It had risen among people who would never have otherwise broken the law, because the people who were all going to speakeasies, they were breaking the law, and so then it starts to become more acceptable to break the law. You start deciding, well, this law, I'm choosing not to follow. Maybe I won't follow this law. But also some police officers began to be tempted and to break the law. They were seeing these bootleggers and these moonshiners making huge amount of money. The criminals making all this money. They were still making the same as what they were making before. They were risking their lives. And I'm sure it began to seem that there was something wrong with this. So some of them started taking bribes to turn to look the other way. Some of them got involved. And in fact, remember that Southport police chief that almost died? When the bootleggers shot out his windshield on River Road? Well, eventually, a couple years later, he was no longer police chief at that point, but he was convicted of smuggling 300 cases of liquor. They caught him guarding the liquor, and he ended up going to prison. But without all those things that had happened, he became a policeman. He obviously wanted to uphold the law, but at some point it had shifted, and he changed his decisions. There was a lot more violence. I mentioned the KKK terrorism. There was the violence from the gangs and those kind of things, the mafia, things like that. World War I had ended, so there was no longer this drive to be patriotic. We're never going to have another war, so that was no longer a reason. Fighting was over. And then by 1929, stock market crashed. Depression started. People probably could use a drink, but also, we could use those jobs, you know, the liquor industry, the truckers, the saloons, all those jobs, we could use them again. We didn't have enough jobs. So there were all those reasons people were starting to get sour on moonshining, or on prohibition. Not on moonshining. And also, people had started to realize that prohibition camel was a symbol for the dries. Prohibition was hiding some pretty ugly stuff. It was a way of religious intolerance and bigotry, where people thought they were getting prohibition, but they were really spreading things that were pretty ugly. So FDR ran in 1932 on the platform that he was going to repeal prohibition and then bring happy days here again. And so he won, and he kept his promise. And so the 21st Amendment was passed in 1933. And unlike when we started prohibition, where there was a year's delay between when it was ratified to when it went into effect, with the 21st Amendment, it was instantaneous. So as soon as it was approved, Utah was the last state to ratify it. They got the 2/3 that they needed. They immediately anyone could drink alcohol, except in the 24 states who had outlawed it themselves, like North Carolina. So really in North Carolina, nothing changed immediately when they repealed when they passed the 21st Amendment. And in fact, in North Carolina, they did not vote on the 21st Amendment. They refused to ratify it. They refused to vote on it. And to this day, North Carolina has never ratified the 21st Amendment. Just aren't going to go there. But once again, North Carolina found itself positioned between two states that were wet. You know, Virginia and South Carolina both had gone back to selling liquor. North Carolina was trying to hold out to be dry. Majority of people lived within 50 miles of one border or the other. Cars were much better then. They got better at driving. They could go across and get liquor. So after a while, North Carolina realized they were missing out on that tax revenue. If they didn't sell alcohol, they were giving money to South Carolina and Virginia. So first they decided they would legalize beer, and then they would legalize wine. Again, they kept the local option, but they made it possible for local communities to decide. And then in 1937, they legalized liquor, so you could have liquor as a local option. So I'm going to tell you one more story that Kim told me. And this story, I guess it was inevitable. Remember I said that moonshining continued, even though prohibition had ended. Moonshining continued in North Carolina. So this was in the 60s, probably 50s and 60s. Her grandfather and his brother, it was probably inevitable that they would get caught, get in trouble with the law. So it seems that her grandfather's brother Gus and his other brother had a still out in the woods somewhere. And one day her grandfather Ernest had a car that he had just put a lot of money into and fixed up and was real proud of it. So he decides to drive it out to where they are with a still, show them the car, have a drink, that whole deal. So he went out, they did that, had a real nice time. And as he was leaving, they said what they always said to him: when you go down the road, if you see any revenue men, honk your horn so we know to get out of here. So he's driving down the road, he's had a little bit of moonshine. He sees some revenue men there, so he honks his horn. But he doesn't just honk it, he keeps honking it. And then he's driving down, and then he turns around and drives back, so he's driving up and down the road honking his horn. So the revenue men figure out what he's doing. It wasn't subtle at all. So they take off into the way he'd come, race into the woods to go figure out where he's coming from and to find the still. They arrest him, take his car. That was the part that hurt the most. They took his car, never got his car back. And they went into the woods, and his brother Gus was like running off in the distance. But they managed to run him down. But he wasn't by the still, but they managed to run him down out in the woods, and they arrested him. So there was a lawyer here in town named Bun Frank, and he was known as the most effective defense attorney in eastern North Carolina. Okay, and people would always, two men were brawling. They're like, I'm going to punch you out, and then I'm going to get to Bun Frank first. Because they were like, whoever got Bun Frank Club, they were gonna get on. And, and what Kim told me is that he was also known as the bootleg lawyer. So I guess among the bootleggers, they knew that if you got in trouble, you wanted to hire Bun Frank. So the two of them went, Gus and Ernest, and they were brothers and pretty close in age, and they went to see him, and they told him the story, and they said, well, you know, can we hire you? So he just, you know, he sat there, looked at him, back and forth, one to the other, and then he went, yeah, I'll represent you, yeah. So they went to Wilmington, because it was a federal offense. And when they got there, so I guess all men back then wore caps, okay? But they all wore their caps differently. I mean, one to the side, one on the back of his head, one forward. So this was Gus was the one who'd been charged. He's the one they caught in the woods. And he said to Ernest, all right, I want you to fix your cap, kind of push it to the back, pull the brim in like this, just kind of wear it, you know, like that, the way your brother wears it, and stay outside the courtroom until I signal you. So they're in the courtroom, the deputy is up there, and he said, do you see the man that you saw in the woods that you ran down? And he pointed to Gus at the defense table and says, yeah, it's him. And Bun signaled for Ernest. He walks in wearing the same clothes as Gus, looking almost exactly identical to Gus, wearing his cap the same, but he really couldn't tell them apart, or certainly couldn't tell them from distance. And he said, are you sure it was that man? Everybody could see that there's no way he could prove that it was one or the other because they looked so much alike. They ended up dropping the charges, he got off, and they threw away, and that's why they call Bun Frank the Perry Mason of Southport. So, at one time, remember I told you that Wilmington went west as soon as it had the opportunity. Southport did not. So there was an ABC station or ABC store in Wilmington in 1937. There used to be a gas station on the corner of Moore and House Street. And the owner, every so often, would go with his buddies. They would drive up to Wilmington, and they would all buy their legal limit of whiskey. They would buy pint bottles. They had 3 brands that they would buy, and that was it. And then they would bring it back to Southport. And those in the know knew that there was a certain car was parked in the parking lot, and there was a sign in the window that said, "For sale, fully equipped." That meant basically that there was liquor in the house. And if you knew that signal and you knew the people in the gas station, you could go in and buy your choice of one of the 3 whiskeys that they had purchased. So, the ABC store. Now, you probably all know where the ABC store is in Southport, I would assume. If you care to know, you already know. It's not going to be on our tour. That is the only ABC store that Southport has ever had. So Wilmington got their first ABC store in 1937. When would you guess that Southport got its ABC store? 70s. Yes, the 70s. Not as bad as the 70s. Or 2 years before. This is closer. 1957. Okay? But, so got an ABC store in 1957, but it would be more than another 20 years before you could buy liquor by the drink. Where you could go into a restaurant and purchase a mixed drink in a restaurant. What you would have to do is bring your pint with you. Yeah, brown bag, and you would buy the setup, and then you would mix your own drink. So some of you may have heard us mentioning Miss Susie Carson. She was the founder of the Southport Historical Society back in 1976. And she was a Baptist. She was known to be anti-liquor. And there was a gentleman in town named Ormond Leggett. And he was circulating a petition to get liquor by the drink. So he came in to see Susie. She was working away. She worked for a lawyer's office. I think she worked for Bun Frank and another lawyer. So she was swamped. She was behind her desk. She was really busy. He comes in and he goes, "Miss Susie, would you sign this petition?" And she said, "Well, what's it for?" He said, "It's to improve our drinking water." And she's like, "Fine, okay." She signed it. He left, and he's like chortling to himself. And a few minutes later, somebody said, "Miss Susie, do you know what you just signed?" And she said, "Yeah, a petition to improve our drinking water." And they said, "No, it was a petition to get liquor by the drink here in Southport." So she was also, so she jumped up, she races around, she runs out on the street, to run down Foreman Leggett, and of course he's out there laughing because he So she grabs the petition, she scratches her name out, whacks him with it, and says, "Don't you ever do anything like that again." And I don't think he thought he was going to get away with it anyway. So he wasn't fazed. He went. So then when he got his petition finished, he took it to the courthouse and he was talking to the clerk there, and he said, "You know what? I almost got Susie's signature on there. That would have been great." And he said, and the clerk said, "If you had brought it in with her signature on it," he goes, "we would not have believed it." And he said, "In fact, everyone knows she's so dry, she won't even eat a wine sap apple." So finally, Southport did get liquor by the drink. It was in 1979. I'm sure it was without Susie Carson's help. But liquor is still state controlled, obviously, and there are still some things, if you come from someplace else, there's some things you probably find unusual here. So liquor stores open Monday through Saturday until last month. The law changed last month, so now the liquor stores are open part of the day on Sunday. That's what changed. The other change that happened last month is up until then, you couldn't go to a bar, if you're in a restaurant with a bar, you couldn't go up to the bar and buy 2 drinks to bring back to your table, to your date. You couldn't go up and get two drinks. But as of last month, you can go up and get 2 glasses of beer or 2 glasses of wine, to take back, but you still can't get liquor. So you can't go up and get 2 mixed drinks. If anybody's letting you, they're not supposed to.
Is that state law or is that local?
That is, Claire, is that state law?
My guess is that the description you just gave is a city one. But
City? Okay.
Yeah, the liquor by the drink was a state statute, and it was late 70s before it was anywhere.
Before it was even a possibility. Okay.
Yeah.
But that might have been.
But North Carolina's got such it's a spider web of liquor laws to recognize local interests, and it's very hard to find a
It makes
case.
sense when you think about it. The local community should be deciding how much drinking goes on in their town. So, there's that, but it's confusing. The other things, though, that you won't see is you won't see any happy hours, 2-for-1 happy hours. You won't see any happy hours. You won't see 2-for-1. You won't see ladies' night. You won't see specials on a certain brand of drink. Those things don't happen, and they still don't happen. So now, researching nearby history, we looked at pretty much a lot of the things that we did last time, but the additional things were constitutional amendments and realizing how much those can change people's day-to-day life. And then also digging into newspapers is another way to find out about history and looking at archives online. And then oral history stories from Kim and the other anecdotes that I told you. The ones that were not from Kim all came from this book, which is a fantastic book called Before We Were Quaint. It was written by a past president of the Historical Society. For years, he talked to people, wrote down their stories, interviewed them, and then he just collected it all together in lots of anecdotes and a really good overview of Southport history before it was quaint. So I have additional resources. I will do the same thing I did last time and send those to you in an email so you don't have to write them down. And now I will answer any questions that you have remaining. Then we will pick up the room as we have to, and then we're going to go over to the old jail for a tour there, a mini tour there. And in case, does everybody know where the old jail is? Does anybody not know? Okay, you don't know. It's, so if you look on this map, we're here. See that mark? If you go down Moore Street, you take almost any left, you're going to go up to Nash, where Nash Street is. It's on the corner of Nash and Brett.
Across from the old cemetery.
Across from the old cemetery. You know the cemetery? Yeah, do you know the old cemetery? It's right across from there. Okay, so everybody feel okay driving up? Yeah. It's about a quarter mile.
You want a global Coast Guard perspective on rum running and actually how going through that town actually gave us an edge up in World War II.
Did I say this again? So practicing, sort of practicing on the rum runners gave us a...
Right, well, actually not practicing. Coast Guard, like, during, it's almost like running fisheries now, like when Prohibition was granted, like, set up. Alcohol came from all over the world in the United States. It was ran from everywhere. And so and people were making money, even people in North Carolina. So if you were a Coast Guardsman at that time, it got dangerous. And it's like a contradiction in terms of like we're doing fisheries, we go out there and if they're violating, we have to ride them up. But if they're drowning, we have to go save them. And so, so the Coast Guard stations are active, but their families and stuff wanted to get so hostile that they had to move onto the stations in tents and stuff. Even though we were like in the big ships, there is one Coast Guard unit that did get taken down, one cutter off the coast of Florida by the Rum Runner King. And it's 27, and what makes it so significant is he was taken on shore. He took down 2 coasties and a Secret Service station. Well, he was captured, taken on shore, convicted, and in 1929 they were going to hang him. Well, the locals were so against Prohibition, they wouldn't let him be hanged on their land. They wanted it on. So he's the only man to ever be hung on the Coast Guard unit, and he was in Fort Lauderdale. They were trying to. They were doing their, so there's a hangar for seaplanes and stuff. So they hung him in the hangar on the Coast Guard.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So how does this go to where World War II comes in?
Right.
Has anybody ever heard of Elizabeth Friedman? Elizabeth Friedman? She's the first female crypto analyst in this country. She's honored every year at the NSA. She actually worked for the Coast Guard as a civilian during Rome. And so she's credited with so they worked like all over the world cracking codes because they created all these codes and stuff. Credited with within 2 years, her and her unit broke down like 3,000 different codes and was very effective. Well, in World War II, so Prohibition goes away, the unit still stayed intact. And then here comes World War II. Well, their unit, Coast Guard kind of gets absorbed into the Navy at that time. It was Unit 387, which has got to give its title. She's still part of this unit, but so they're breaking codes all over the world. Her unit alone was credited with breaking like 12,000 codes and actually finding 3 of the German Enigma machines, providing intelligence for that. And so if you guys know, but at one point in time I was reading on an NSA hub that a lot of things that FBI took credit for is actually that unit. Being in the Coast Guard, we only have until recently, we only have one historian. And so there's a lot of history, but FBI took a lot of it. So the FBI and the Pentagon the Europeans our allies got so frustrated to deal with them, they refused to deal with any intelligence except unless it went to Unit 387. And so,
Thank you. Wow, that was really fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing that. And it's also great. Then next week we're going to be talking about the world wars on the shores of Southport because we did impact the whole community. And then the last week we're going to be talking about hurricanes, but there's also a lot about the life-saving stations, which was the precursors to the Coast Guard. So all kinds of stuff. So I think we just need to. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes. Say it.
How much is the book?
It is the member price is 22 and the non-member price is 25.
Okay.
Yes.
The big houses along the waterfront that you see here in Southport, were they mainly sea captains or wealthy merchants that had those homes?
Some of them were, Bob, you want to speak to that? Some of them were from people who had been blockade runners, Tommy Thompson's house and C.C. Morris's house.
Pretty well holds true. The eastern side of town is the business professional side, historically, and then this western side would be the blockade running river pilots and the river captains. The houses on the river, most of them are relatively new. One of the houses that is not new is the office for the quarantine station. Probably been there well over 100 years, and that's on the riverside. Those on the other side of the street, ran boarding houses.
Wow.
two or three of them that are still standing with wooden houses. I can't think of a river plow on that side, on the eastern side of Bay Street. I can't, I just thought of one. J.J. Rurik, or J.J. Atkins was a river pilot. He was Robert Rurik's uncle.
Okay, let's, I think we need about, 8 chairs, 10 chairs, usually about?
369.
So, black, unfortunately. So let's